Yo, what up? It's your proverbial boy Jeffy here in Oslo, Norway at the world famous Frog Park. As you can see behind me, I've got a phallic statue composed of naked bodies. And what better place to tell you a story about how I was writhing in the darkness in pain and agony. About 10 years ago now, I decided to write a book. You might have read my book. It also features a lot of stories inside of it about naked people writhing in the darkness, but that's neither here nor there. Now, when I wrote this book, I remember it was one of the hardest things I ever did. I was working off of 1,400 pages of so-called field reports that I had written, basically a journal of my experiences going out, and that was the base material. And I was editing this into a coherent narrative and everything. And so each day before I would start, I would sit down, I'd say, okay, well, I've gone through this many pages of the base material. I write this many pages per day. It's probably going to be this many pages. And I would sit on the calculator and I would go through different scenarios. If I do this many per day, it's going to take this long. If I do this many per day, it's going to take this long. And I would spend so much time dicking or playing this calculator game that literally the book probably would have taken several months less to complete if I had just sat there and wrote the goddamn book. Maybe you felt the same way, like you're just fretting over this looming project that has to be done, and you spend all of this time thinking about how long it's gonna take. You're just burning up time, you're putting it off. Personally, I've always struggled with this issue of making things harder than they are in my mind. And maybe you've struggled with this as well. You know, making things more complicated than they need to be and putting them off so long that eventually it just becomes this big looming thing where you don't even want to start. Now, a major part of all this is just how you look at yourself. In other words, your personal identity. For example, I used to say, and I still actually say this from time to time, I'm one of those people that needs a lot of time to gear up, right? I need time to get geared up, especially when it comes to creating a new product, for example. Because when I'm creating a new program, like my mentoring, or when I created my RESONATOR program or execute the program, whatever, I know that it's gonna take like 14-hour days. So in my mind, I'm like, I gotta get into gear to get into that headspace to do that. So it's become this sort of identity where like, I'm the kind of person, I need some time to get into gear. So think about where you might be employing phrases like that. You might be saying to yourself things like, well, I'm just not a morning person, or math isn't my strong suit. These kind of phrases build these negative self-images that actually make it really difficult for you to change. One thing that I hear on program a lot on boot camp is I'll tell a student to behave in a certain way. I'll be like, okay, when you're going up, you're acting in a way that's not going to get you the results. Do these things. And the student will often say something like, well, that's just not me. I'm trying to do this, but it feels like this betrayal of myself. And this sort of identity conflict, when I see students, it's really, in many cases, it's their biggest barrier to change. But people come to me, why? Because they're trying to pull off stuff that you only actually see in Hollywood, right? They want epic results. They don't want showed results. These kind of things, if you want to pull them off, it takes skill, it takes practice, it takes control. You've got to make the conscious manipulation of your body language, of your tone of voice, of your emotional energy. You got to make all of that conscious manipulation seem unconscious and natural. You got to make it seem effortless, like you're not even doing anything, and that takes practice. You've got to learn a new style of communication. There's a parallel between the original learned naturalness of your current personality and the process of learning and making a new style feel natural. You want to exercise with many different styles until the human energies feeding into them are no longer inhibited by the shape of the vessel into which they flow. Right? That's kind of a wordy way to say it. But again, when I'm on boot camp, a lot of the time the students will say, Jeff, were you always like this when you go out? You know, I see you're pretty ebullient, you're pretty confident in what you say, you're able to go up and bing, 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 bing. Were you always like this? I'm like, fuck no, dude. If you saw me when I first started, you would have no doubts whatsoever about your ability to replicate anything that you see us do. So what made me change? Well, like I said, I saw that the shit I was doing simply didn't work. So behavioral change starts with awareness. Where are you unconsciously doing dumb shit, and where are you also doing things that are positive? And that's where a coach can come in, or a mentor can come in, to have a third person observation or perspective and can kind of give you observational feedback and descriptive feedback that makes the desired change available to you. Your identity, it's like this river that's always changing. So me saying I'm good at dating, me saying I'm a public speaker, I'm an entrepreneur, I can say those things now. I wasn't always those things. They became a part of me because I put in place habits that reinforce those identities, giving my brain the proof that shaped it. Again, a new identity needs proof. This is one of the concepts that James Clear talks about in his book, Atomic Habits, which is a very instrumental book that helped me to break out of this, again, this habit of making things harder than they were. So what is the process? Number one, figure out who you want to be. Number two, show yourself that you could be that person by building up small victories. A lot of people ask me, they say, Jeff, how long is it going to take for me to get good? The answer to that is quite simple. As long as it takes. Like, what's the alternative? Keep being a loser? Like, for me, that was simply not an option. I was going to, as long as it takes, like look, the time is going to pass regardless. You might as well be in the gym, right? So understand, tiny 1% improvements across the board can lead to huge success. So just keep putting that 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%. In Charisma Mastery and in my mentoring, we pinpoint every single area that goes into the gestalt of your communication. Like everything that goes into your instrument, from your voice, your face, your body language, to how your intuition interacts with your emotions, to how the intellect might be a bridge or a barrier between inner and outer, to things like frame control, to things like persuasive ability, to things like conversational technique, core confidence, leadership, conflict communication. We take all of those things and we fine tune them bit by bit. But the thing is, you've got to slog through those pain periods where you don't see the result first. Like, that's the biggest thing. People get into this, like just like the gym, they'll get into it and then they'll drop out after like 3 weeks. How do you kind of grit your teeth and power through that tough phase where the fruits of your labor aren't quite visible yet? Well, you do that by zeroing in on purpose as opposed to goals. So what's the difference between those two, right? Think of purpose, you know, it's a spectrum. On one end, you've got like complete aimlessness where there's no purpose, right? No goals in sight. And on the other, there's this overly intense sort of tunnel vision where you're focusing on these small part goals that might actually steer you away from the big picture. So let's say you're out there and you're meeting people, you're interacting, and you screw up. You know, you make some sort of error and you blow it. You might start beating yourself up, you stop having fun, you take it to heart, the night becomes this circling the drain of despair, and eventually, to just avoid the discomfort, you stop going out completely. Or maybe you become so laser focused on a specific outcome, like, you know, getting closer to a specific someone, that you lose sight of the bigger goal, right? Which is what? Building a stronger, more powerful, more expressive communications, more charismatic you over the long haul. And when you don't hit those small targets, you either stop trying, you maybe go even harder on yourself, you know, and then burn out, or maybe you try to get somebody else to push you, right? But and all of those things have various cons to them, you know, various drawbacks to them. But having a bigger, all-encompassing purpose increases your odds of hitting those smaller goals along the way, along with many others that you might not even have thought of yet, right? Simultaneously, those smaller part goals can actually act as a kind of sort of rocket fuel that propels you towards your grander purpose. They can invigorate you and fire you up. Now, another aspect that feeds in this idea of making things harder than they really are is the social conditioning of perfectionism. This constant feeling that nothing's good enough. You're not good enough. Your results aren't good enough. It's just never enough. And ironically, this pursuit of perfection, very often it hampers your progress towards achieving it, even though true perfection is an illusion in any ongoing process. Again, you're not a product, you're a process that's constantly evolving, and therefore you can never be truly perfect. So the pattern of perfectionism as a social conditioning is very straightforward. We focus best when we're focused on the present. However, perfectionism forces us to fixate on this overly specific future goal, right? We're then constantly comparing our present progress to that far off goal, and this siphons off our energy to where we're either like wringing our hands over past mistakes, or we're constantly worrying about this imaginary future. Anything that draws energy away from the process itself is not useful. Perfectionism, as I said a moment ago, it wrongly assumes that perfection is achievable. And this makes any mistakes intolerable, right? As a result, we don't learn, we don't grow from our mistakes. Instead, we hide or deny them, or even defend them as choices that we're making. This mindset, this kind of calcified mindset of perfectionism, it only amplifies feelings of shame, guilt, hopelessness, and that's what caused most of these inhibitions in the first place. So, you know, again, going back to that book, Atomic Habits by James Clear, and again, I'd highly encourage you to read that yourself. In the book, James Clear relates a story of a photography class. And in this photography class, the teacher splits the class into two, and he says, this half of the class, you're gonna be graded on the quality of one photograph that you submit at the end of the semester. Other half of the class, end of the semester, you're gonna be graded solely on the quantity of photographs that you submitted. Now, an interesting thing happened. At the end of the semester, it turned out that the quantity group was submitting photographs of consistently higher quality even than the quality group was, which kind of is an unusual thing to think about. But why did that happen? Because they were iterating so much. They weren't just concerned about like making this one awesome photograph. They're like, okay, I need to make as many as possible. So in that process, they're like trying different styles, they're trying different composition, they're trying different exposures, they're trying different lighting techniques, they're trying different topics to photograph, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the key to this is just get your fucking reps in. To build a habit, you need repetition, you need practice. It's not about the amount of time put in necessarily, but it's more about sticking to a regular schedule. That's something that's helped me tremendously. Always show up, even if it's a bad day. You know, if you go to the gym, you're like, I don't feel like going to the gym, just drag your ass there, right? Like, oh, I don't feel like, you know, making content today, just drag my ass in front of the camera, turn it on, do a quick live, right? The rough workouts are often the best because they help maintain your momentum. Lost days are more damaging than successful days are beneficial. I'll say that again, that's a huge takeaway. Lost days are more damaging than successful days help. Ditch that all or nothing mindset. Perfectionism, it's a form of negative social conditioning. Avoid just putting up zeros, right? Just avoid putting up that 0 day. Don't let lost days eat into the compounding and the momentum. And this all ties back to identity, right? You tell yourself, I'm not the kind of person who skips workouts. I'm not the kind of person who skips work. So to facilitate good habits, one thing that's very important is just reducing the friction that's required. And then for bad habits, do the opposite, increase the friction. I personally use social media blockers. I'm incapable of viewing social media on my computer or my phone for a set number of hours. Like it'll just say, you can't access this, unless I like literally restart the computer. Another thing that helped me a great deal, when I go to sleep, try this, plug your phone in across the room. Right? Literally, this is such a small, dumb thing. And I know you're going to sleep, you just want to set your phone right by your head. No. Get up, take it across the room, plug it in. That way, when you wake up in the morning, you don't just roll over and like TikTok for 2 hours. All right? So prime your environment. Prime your environment for the future use. Another trick that helped me a lot with this whole making things harder than they are was breaking things down to the easiest possible version. In other words, large chunking it. I noticed for a lot of guys like I have trouble going out. It's like, well, you break it, you're small chunking it, you're making it to be this huge thing. Like, I gotta put my shoes on, I gotta comb my hair, I gotta get to the car, I gotta drive down there, I gotta find parking, I gotta queue up, I gotta get in the place, it's gonna be this huge pain in the ass. It's like, look, just break it down to the 2-minute version. Just put your shoes on, which leads to going outside, which leads to being out, which leads to having fun, and then leads to success. Because most people, they build it up in their head to be such a big problem, they can't even go outside. If you were just make it small. I'm just gonna go outside. I'm just gonna go outside and just see what happens. That's where it starts. And again, over time, this becomes a part of your identity. Last but not least, you wanna surround yourself with people who share the habits that you wanna cultivate. In other words, you know, if you lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas. You are the average of the 5 people you hang out with most. Beyond that, just find one accountability partner, right? Make the consequences of not stepping up public. Make them painful. Like set a goal and have a painful deterrent. Back in the day, my buddy Owen, you know, he moved to Hawaii and he had been out there a couple years and he was really out of practice. And when he moved back, he was so rusty. Like, I remember we brought in this new guy and he's like, is Owen testing me? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, we went out and he sucks. I'm like, oh, no, he sucks. He's like, what? I thought he was like the best guy. I'm like, no, he fucking sucks. Because he had just been isolated for so long. And what he did, he actually partnered with young Julian. And, you know, he was really hungry and he would always get him out of bed and get him out and push him to challenge himself. And that got him back up to where he needed to be. To wrap up here, the big takeaway is that very often our biggest hurdle of progress is the mental magnification of challenges. And this leads to procrastination, it leads to avoidance, and ultimately it leads to lower self-esteem when you don't get it done. If you make things harder than they are, remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about being better than you were yesterday, right? Change is very, very possible. Hell, I'm living proof of that. However, it's essential that you remember this transformation, it's a process, it's not an event. okay? It's about making small, consistent improvements over time. I did all this, and I distilled everything that I learned over 20 years into my Charisma mentoring program. This is an 8-week program. It's designed to help you navigate some of these very issues we've been talking about in this video. We give you the tools, we give you the techniques, and we give the ability to actually take charge of your own development for as long as you need to. It's not just about teaching you to put on some kind of performance, all right? It's about helping you make that deep, lasting identity level change that everybody's looking for. So if you want to take the next step, click on that link in the description below. You can apply for the mentoring or the boot camps. I'm traveling all around. This is my last year I'm doing them. Hope to see you on there. It'd be my honor and privilege to help you out with these issues. This is Jeffy, and I'll see you next time. Jeffy.